Why? She asked simply. Because everyone deserves a second chance, Jim said, even people who don't think they need one. 3 months later, Karen's pool sparkled in the afternoon sun as she hosted her first neighborhood barbecue. Mrs. Chen brought homemade dumplings. The Kowalskis contributed beer and war stories about their own HOA battles. Even Janet Morrison showed up with her famous potato salad and the latest neighborhood gossip. Marcus Webb had resigned and moved to another community. The new compliance officer was a retired teacher who believed in education over enforcement. Karen floated in her infinity pool, watching her neighbors' children play Marco Polo while their parents shared stories and laughter. The water felt different now, not like an escape from her community, but like a bridge to it. Her phone buzzed with a text from Rebecca. "How's the pool?" Karen smiled and typed back, "Perfect. But the view is even better." As the sun set over Willowbrook Estates, Karen realized she'd finally achieved what she'd always claimed to want, a truly perfect neighborhood. She just hadn't understood that perfection had nothing to do with rules and everything to do with the people who chose to follow them together. But as she dried off and headed inside, she noticed a new family moving into Marcus's old house across the street. The husband was already measuring their fence line with suspicious precision, and the wife was taking photos of every neighbor's landscaping. Karen sighed and reached for her phone. Some battles ended, but the war for the soul of suburban perfection was eternal. At least now she knew which side she was really fighting for. Rebecca smiled with predatory satisfaction. Marcus Webb has to provide those records under the Freedom of Information provisions of your HOA covenant. He has no choice. Over the next week, Karen embarked on the most humbling campaign of her life. She knocked on doors throughout Willowbrook Estates, not to report violations, but to ask neighbors for copies of their pool permits and renovation approvals. Many doors slammed in her face. Well, chuckled Tom Kowalski, clearly enjoying Karen's discomfort. The HOA queen needs help from us peasants. I made mistakes, Tom. I'm trying to fix them. To her surprise, several neighbors actually helped. Mrs. Chen, the elderly woman Karen had once reported for hanging laundry outside, handed over her pool documentation with a knowing smile. Sometimes the universe teaches us lessons in unexpected ways, Mrs. Chen said gently. Perhaps this is yours. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Janet Morrison, the neighborhood gossip Karen had always avoided. "Honey, I've got something better than permits," Janet whispered conspiratorially. "Marcus approved the Stevenson's pool renovation over email last month. Never went to committee at all. I've got screenshots." Karen stared at the evidence on Janet's phone. Selective enforcement indeed. Marcus had streamlined the process for his golf buddies while subjecting Karen to the full bureaucratic nightmare. But as Karen drove home, her triumph felt hollow. She'd spent years building walls between herself and her neighbors, and now she needed their help to tear down the biggest wall of all. The woman in her rearview mirror, red-eyed, humbled, dependent on the kindness of people she'd once terrorized, was someone she barely recognized. Her phone rang. "Rebecca, I've got good news and bad news. The good news is we have enough evidence to force the HOA to approve your pool retroactively. And the bad news? Marcus Webb just filed a counter-complaint. He's claiming you threatened him during your initial inspection. That's a separate violation that could result in a lien against your property." Karen's hands tightened on the steering wheel. The war was far from over, it was just beginning. The emergency HOA board meeting drew a crowd larger than any in Willowbrook Estates history. Karen sat in the front row, flanked by Rebecca and a surprising number of neighbors who'd come to support her. Across the aisle, Marcus Webb consulted with the HOA's attorney, his confidence radiating like heat from asphalt. Board President Patricia Vance called the meeting to order with barely concealed irritation. "We're here to address the Martinez pool violation and related complaints." Rebecca stood, armed with a banker's box full of evidence. "Before we discuss violations, let's discuss the pattern of selective enforcement that's plagued this community for years." She methodically presented 17 cases of pool approvals granted without architectural review, including Marcus's own email approvals. The room grew tense as neighbors recognized their own situations in the evidence. Furthermore, Rebecca continued, Mr. Webb's claim of threats is contradicted by his own body cam footage, which we've obtained through subpoena. Karen watched Marcus's face pale as Rebecca played the audio. His voice was clear. I suggest you contact an attorney familiar with HOA law. Her response was equally clear, desperate, but not threatening. The Martinez family has been selectively targeted for enforcement, while others received preferential treatment. Rebecca concluded, this isn't just about a pool, it's about equal treatment under the community's governing documents. Marcus stood abruptly. Mrs. Martinez has been a destructive force in this community for years. The Henderson family left because of her harassment campaign. Actually, came a voice from the back of the room. We left because of the selective enforcement you just demonstrated tonight. Karen spun around to see Jim Henderson entering the room with his wife Maria. The couple she'd once tormented looked older, wiser, and surprisingly at peace. We came back to testify, Maria Henderson said. Not for Karen, but for fairness. What happened to us was wrong. What's happening to her is wrong too. The tide in the room shifted palpably. Karen felt tears threatening again, but these were different, tears of gratitude rather than rage. Patricia Vance called for a board vote. The motion to approve Karen's pool retroactively passed 4-1, with Marcus abstaining due to conflict of interest. The motion to censure Marcus for selective enforcement passed 3-2. As the crowd dispersed, Karen found herself face-to-face with the Hendersons. Karen Martinez clutched the certified letter with trembling hands as tears streamed down her perfectly contoured cheeks. The yellow caution tape stretched across her beloved infinity pool like crime scene barriers, while HOA compliance officer Marcus Webb stood stone-faced in her meticulously manicured backyard. This is insane, she shrieked, mascara creating dark rivulets down her face. I've lived in Willowbrook Estates for 12 years. I am this community. Marcus adjusted his clipboard with practiced indifference. Mrs. Martinez, the violation is clear. Section 14.7 of the HOA Covenant explicitly states that pool installations require architectural committee approval. You never submitted plans. Karen's world tilted sideways. The $75,000 pool renovation, her pride and joy, her escape from the suffocating perfection of suburban life, was now a liability. She'd spent months planning every detail: the imported Italian tiles, the integrated spa, the underwater LED system that made evening swims feel like floating in liquid starlight. But I talked to Sandra Kellerman at the Easter barbecue, Karen protested, wiping her nose with the back of her hand. She said it looked gorgeous. Sandra isn't on the architectural committee, Marcus replied coolly. That would be Mrs. Chen, Mr. Rodriguez, and myself. The irony hit Karen like a slap. For years, she'd been the neighborhood's unofficial enforcer, the woman who reported overgrown lawns, improperly sorted recycling bins, and holiday decorations left up past regulation dates. She'd made Marcus's job easier by documenting every minor infraction with photographs and strongly worded emails. Now the very system she'd championed was crushing her. You know what this is really about, Karen said, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. This is payback for the Hendersons. Marcus's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. The Henderson incident had been Karen's masterpiece of HOA vigilantism, a months-long campaign against their unauthorized chicken coop that ended with a $5,000 fine and the family moving away in disgrace. This is about code compliance, nothing more, Marcus said, but Karen caught the flash of satisfaction in his eyes. Her phone buzzed with a text from her husband Dave. Meeting ran late. How did pool inspection go? Karen stared at the message, realizing she'd have to tell him their home equity loan, secured against the value of their improved property, was now funding a major violation. The architectural review process could take months. The daily fines would start at $100 and compound weekly. 30 days to remedy or face escalating penalties, Marcus said, heading toward the gate. I suggest you contact an attorney familiar with HOA law. As his footsteps faded, Karen stood alone beside her condemned paradise, the setting sun turning the drained pool into a concrete tomb. She pulled out her phone and scrolled through her contacts, stopping at a name she'd hoped never to call: Rebecca Santos, the lawyer who'd represented the Hendersons. The woman Karen had once considered her greatest enemy might now be her only salvation. Rebecca Santos's law office occupied a strip mall between a nail salon and a tax preparation service. Hardly the intimidating fortress Karen had imagined. The lawyer herself was surprisingly petite, with kind eyes that seemed to see straight through Karen's designer facade to the desperate woman beneath. "I have to admit, Mrs. Martinez, I never expected this call," Rebecca said, pouring coffee from a pot that had seen better days. "Especially not from the woman who called my clients neighborhood destroyers in front of the entire homeowners meeting." Karen shifted uncomfortably in the worn leather chair. "I was protecting property values, I thought." She stopped, the familiar justifications feeling hollow now. "I was wrong about the Hendersons. Is Emma still afraid of chickens? She's actually raising them again. We moved to a nice place outside the city limits." Rebecca's expression softened slightly. "But we're not here to discuss my daughter. Tell me about your pool." As Karen explained her situation, Rebecca took detailed notes. The lawyer's questions were sharp, probing, and increasingly optimistic. "This is interesting," Rebecca mused. "The architectural committee approved 17 pool renovations in the past 5 years, all without requiring full architectural review. So, selective enforcement is a beautiful thing in HOA law. If they've waived the requirement for others, they can't suddenly decide to enforce it against you." Rebecca leaned forward. "Unless, of course, they can prove your situation is materially different from the others." Karen felt the first stirring of hope. "It's not. Mine's actually smaller than the Kowalski's renovation last summer." "Perfect. I'll need documentation of every pool approval in your neighborhood dating back 7 years. Can you get that? From Marcus? He hates me."